For more than 4,500 years, this structure has stood as humanity's most enduring architectural achievement, outlasting empires, religions, and entire civilizations. We have all been taught the same story about these pyramids. From our earliest school days, we learned that they were tombs, elaborate burial chambers built by pharaohs who commanded vast armies of workers to construct their eternal resting places. This narrative appears in every textbook, every museum exhibition, every documentary you have ever watched. The story is simple, clean, and satisfying. Powerful kings wanted to ensure their safe passage into the afterlife, so they built the most massive tombs the world has ever seen. But what if this story is fundamentally wrong? What if the greatest archaeological assumption in human history is built not on solid evidence, but on a foundation of misunderstanding, assumption, and academic inertia? What if the pyramids were never intended as tombs at all? Today, we are going to examine evidence that challenges everything mainstream archaeology has told us about these magnificent structures. We will explore the glaring inconsistencies that have been swept under the rug for generations. We will look at the missing pieces that should be there if the tomb theory were correct. And we will investigate alternative theories that might finally explain what these structures were truly built to accomplish. This is not a story about conspiracy theories or ancient aliens. This is about looking at physical evidence with fresh eyes and asking uncomfortable questions that have been ignored for far too long. This is about recognizing that our ancestors might have been far more sophisticated, far more knowledgeable, and far more capable than we have given them credit for. By the time we finish this journey together, you may never look at the pyramids the same way again. You may question what else we have accepted without proper scrutiny. You may realize that history is not a collection of settled facts, but rather an ongoing investigation, and that the most important discoveries might still lie ahead of us. So let us begin by examining what we have been told, and then let us systematically dismantle that narrative piece by piece. The traditional story, how we got here. The conventional explanation for the pyramids comes largely from 19th century European archaeologists who arrived in Egypt with certain assumptions about ancient cultures and their capabilities. These scholars were products of their time, operating within a worldview that saw Western civilization as the pinnacle of human achievement and ancient non-Western cultures as primitive by comparison. When these early Egyptologists discovered smaller pyramids and rock-cut tombs that did contain mummies and burial goods, they extrapolated backward. If these structures were tombs, they reasoned, then all pyramids must be tombs. The logic seemed sound at the time, and it became the foundation upon which generations of scholarship would be built. According to this conventional theory, the pyramids were constructed during Egypt's Old Kingdom period, specifically between 2,580 and 2,560 years before the Common Era. The pharaohs of this period, particularly Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, supposedly commanded these massive construction projects to ensure their safe passage into the afterlife and to demonstrate their power and divine status. The ancient Egyptians, we are told, believed in a complex journey after death. The soul would separate into different components. The Ka represented the life force, the essence that animated the body during life. The Ba represented personality and individuality, the aspects that made each person unique. The Ak was the transfigured spirit that, if the proper rituals were performed, could dwell with the gods in the afterlife. For these spiritual components to survive and eventually reunite, the physical body needed to be preserved through the elaborate process of mummification and protected within an inviolable structure. The pyramid, according to this theory, served as the ultimate protection. Its massive stone construction would prevent tomb robbers from reaching the pharaoh's mummy and the treasures buried with him. The internal chambers would house not only the body, but also everything the pharaoh might need in the afterlife. This interpretation seemed logical because archaeologists had discovered actual royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, particularly the tomb of Tutankhamun, which was found largely intact in 1922. These tombs were filled with elaborate paintings, hieroglyphic texts, describing the journey through the underworld. And in Tutankhamun's case, over 5,000 precious artifacts. The walls displayed scenes from the Book of the Dead, spells for protection, and detailed maps of the underworld. Everything about these tombs screamed their purpose as burial chambers. The scholars then looked at the pyramids and saw sarcophagi inside the chambers. They noted the proximity of mortuary temples adjacent to the pyramids, where offerings would have been made to sustain the deceased pharaoh's spirit. They read references in ancient texts connecting specific pyramids to specific pharaohs. The conclusion seemed obvious and inescapable. The pyramids must be tombs, just older and more architecturally ambitious versions of the same concept. This theory became so entrenched in academic circles that questioning it became professional suicide for any serious archaeologist. Universities taught it as established fact. Museums designed their exhibitions around this narrative. Generations of Egyptologists built their entire careers on this foundation. The tomb theory achieved the status of unquestionable truth. But here is the critical problem that we need to confront honestly. This entire theoretical framework rests on assumption and extrapolation, not on direct evidence from the pyramids themselves. The tomb theory was imposed on the pyramids from outside, based on what was found elsewhere, not on what was actually discovered inside the Great Pyramids of Giza. When we actually examine what has been found inside the major pyramids, when we look at the physical evidence with clear eyes, the tomb theory begins to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The missing evidence. What should be there? But let us start with the most uncomfortable fact that mainstream Egyptology tends to gloss over or explain away with increasingly elaborate justifications. No pharaoh's mummy has ever been found inside any of the three major pyramids at Giza. Not in the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Not in the Pyramid of Khafre. Not in the Pyramid of Menkaure. 0 mummies. 0 burial goods. 0 treasure. 0 evidence of any actual burial ever taking place. Think about that for a moment. We are talking about the most massive, most expensive, most labor-intensive construction projects in human history up to that point. Projects that would have consumed the resources of an entire civilization for decades. And yet, not a single shred of evidence that they were ever used for their supposed purpose. When Arab Caliph Al-Mamun's workers tunneled into the Great Pyramid in 820 CE, they expected to find the legendary treasures of the pharaohs. Historical accounts describe their anticipation and excitement as they broke through the final barrier. Instead, they found empty corridors and empty chambers. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber sat open and empty. No lid, no body, no gold, no artifacts, no burial goods, nothing but bare stone and echoing silence. The immediate response from Egyptologists is predictable and has been repeated so many times it has become a reflexive defense. They claim that tomb robbers must have plundered everything in antiquity, probably within a few generations of the pyramid's construction. But let us think critically about this explanation for a moment, because it raises more questions than it answers. Tomb robbers in ancient Egypt were after portable valuables. They wanted gold, jewelry, precious oils, fine linens, and anything they could carry away and sell. When real tombs were robbed in antiquity, and we have many examples of this, the robbers left behind clear evidence of their crime. You find broken pottery scattered on the floor where they searched for hidden valuables. You see damaged coffins where they tore away gold leaf and precious inlays. You discover mummies that have been unwrapped and searched for amulets and jewelry. You find wall paintings damaged where robbers pried away valuable decorative elements. You see tool marks where they broke through sealed doorways. you find discarded items that were not valuable enough to bother stealing. The archaeological signature of tomb robbery is unmistakable and consistent across hundreds of documented cases. Tomb robbers were thorough but messy. They were in a hurry, working by torchlight, constantly afraid of being caught. They left chaos in their wake. The pyramids show none of this. They are not just empty. They are pristinely empty. The chambers look as though they were sealed empty from the beginning, not ransacked and cleaned out. There is no debris field of broken artifacts. There are no tool marks from forced entry into the burial chamber itself. There is no evidence of the violent disruption that characterizes genuine tomb robbery. Consider this additional problem that the tomb robbery explanation cannot adequately address. King Tutankhamun's tomb, belonging to a relatively minor pharaoh who ruled for only about 9 years during a troubled period of Egyptian history, survived with over 5,000 artifacts intact. His tomb was hidden in the Valley of the Kings, eventually covered by debris from later construction, which helped protect it from discovery. Yet we are expected to believe that the most visible, most massive, most heavily constructed tombs ever built, sitting on a plateau visible for miles in every direction, were all completely emptied without leaving a single artifact behind? We are supposed to accept that tomb robbers managed to remove every single item, including multi-ton granite sarcophagi, every piece of pottery, every scrap of linen, every fragment of wood, every trace of the burial, and did so without leaving any evidence of their activities? The logic simply does not hold up under scrutiny. If ancient tomb robbers had the capability and audacity to completely empty the pyramids, where are the ancient records of such massive heists? The Egyptians kept meticulous records of crimes and punishments. We have papyri describing tomb robberies in the Valley of the Kings and the trials of the criminals who committed them. These documents provide detailed accounts of what was stolen and how the robberies were carried out. Yet there are no records whatsoever of anyone robbing the Great Pyramids of Giza. The second major problem is even more damning when you understand Egyptian burial practices. The Great Pyramid is almost completely devoid of hieroglyphic inscriptions. Walk through the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and you will see bare stone walls. No paintings, no carvings, no religious texts, nothing but blank stone surfaces. This absence is absolutely staggering when you understand how obsessed the ancient Egyptians were with documentation and religious texts. They wrote on everything. Their actual royal tombs are literally covered floor to ceiling with hieroglyphics. The walls display entire chapters from the Book of the Dead. They show the pharaoh's journey through the underworld, depicting the challenges he will face and the spells he must recite to overcome them. They depict the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of truth. They list the names and titles of the deceased in elaborate cartouches. They provide spells for protection against demons and obstacles in the afterlife. They show the pharaoh making offerings to various gods and goddesses. These texts were not optional decorations or artistic flourishes. They were considered absolutely essential for the soul's survival in the afterlife. Without the proper spells and guidance, the pharaoh's soul would be lost, devoured by monsters, or condemned to non-existence. No Egyptian pharaoh would be buried without these critical religious texts surrounding his body. It would be unthinkable, a guarantee of spiritual annihilation. Yet the Great Pyramid, supposedly the most important tomb ever constructed for one of the most powerful pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, has virtually no hieroglyphics in its main chambers. The walls are blank. The ceiling is blank. The floor is blank. How do we explain this? Why would Khufu, if this truly was his tomb, dispense with the most important element of any royal burial? The only hieroglyphic marks found in the Great Pyramid are crude quarry marks discovered by Colonel Howard Weiss in 1837 in the relieving chambers above the King's Chamber. These marks are controversial for several reasons. Some researchers have questioned their authenticity, suggesting Weiss may have forged them to validate his expedition and secure his place in history. Whether authentic or not, these are quarry marks, construction graffiti left by workers. They are not religious texts. They are not meant to guide a soul through the afterlife. They are the equivalent of a construction worker writing his name on a beam before it is installed. They prove nothing about the pyramid's purpose as a tomb. The third problem involves the granite sarcophagus itself. And this is where the tomb theory encounters a logical paradox it simply cannot resolve. The massive granite box that sits in the king's chamber is too large to fit through the ascending passage that leads to the chamber. This is not speculation or theory. You can measure it yourself if you visit. The sarcophagus is physically wider than the passage. It cannot be moved through those corridors under any circumstances. This means the sarcophagus must have been placed in the king's chamber during the pyramid's construction, before the ceiling blocks were lowered into place. It was built into the structure as a permanent architectural feature, not brought in later as funeral equipment. Now think about the implications of this fact. If this pyramid was truly built as Khufu's tomb, why would the sarcophagus be installed before Khufu died? Construction of the pyramid supposedly took about 23 years. What if Khufu had lived another 30 years after construction was completed? Would the sarcophagus just sit there empty, waiting? What if he died unexpectedly during construction? Would they use an unfinished pyramid? Would they abandon the sarcophagus that was already installed and start over? In every documented Egyptian royal burial, and we have many examples from later periods, the sarcophagus was brought into the tomb after construction was complete, during the actual funeral ceremony. This is described in ancient texts and depicted in tomb paintings. The funeral procession would carry the mummy on a sledge, accompanied by priests and mourners. They would place the mummy in the sarcophagus, perform the opening of the mouth ceremony, seal the sarcophagus, and then seal the tomb. The sarcophagus was funeral equipment, not a permanent architectural feature. The fact that the Great Pyramid sarcophagus was built into the structure during construction suggests the chamber was designed for a specific permanent function that required a stone container. This is the design philosophy of a machine or a functional installation, not a temporary burial vault waiting for an unknown future date. The fourth problem is what engineers call overdesign, and it is perhaps the most telling evidence that something other than burial was intended. The Great Pyramid is vastly more sophisticated and precise than it needs to be if its only purpose was to serve as a tomb. Let us look at the numbers, because these numbers should make any thinking person pause and question the official narrative. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. Individual blocks weigh between 2.5 and 80 tons. The total weight is approximately 6 million tons. The base covers an area of 13 acres, roughly the size of 7 city blocks. The structure originally stood 481 feet tall, making it the tallest human-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. But the truly astonishing aspects are the precision and the mathematical relationships encoded in the structure. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 99.98%. It is off by only 3/60ths of a single degree. To put this in perspective, the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England, when it was first built in 1675, was not aligned to true north as accurately as the Great Pyramid, which was supposedly built with copper tools and wooden measuring instruments over 4,000 years earlier. The base of the pyramid is level to within 2.1 centimeters across a distance of 230 meters. That is less than 1 inch of deviation across a base that covers 13 acres. Modern construction standards consider a deviation of less than 1% to be acceptable. The Great Pyramid achieves a deviation of 0.009%. Modern contractors with laser levels and computer-controlled equipment would struggle to match this precision. The blocks fit together with gaps of less than half a millimeter in many places. You cannot slide a credit card between the stones. No mortar was used in most of the construction. The blocks are held together by their own weight and the precision of their fit. This level of precision has allowed the structure to survive 4,500 years of earthquakes, weathering, and the removal of its outer casing stones without collapsing. The internal passages align with specific stars with astronomical precision. The Grand Gallery features a corbelled ceiling that rises to a height of 28 feet, demonstrating advanced architectural knowledge and construction capability. The relieving chambers above the King's Chamber distribute the enormous weight of the structure above using engineering principles that modern architects recognize as sophisticated stress engineering. The entire structure encodes mathematical constants that were supposedly unknown to ancient cultures. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to twice its height equals pi, 3.14159, accurate to 5 decimal places. Some researchers argue this could be coincidental, but when you examine all the mathematical relationships together, coincidence becomes statistically implausible. The golden ratio, phi 1.618, appears in the pyramid's proportions. The ratio of the slant height to half the base equals phi. This ratio appears throughout nature in seashells, flower petals, spiral galaxies, and the proportions of the human body. It is considered the most aesthetically perfect proportion, and Renaissance artists and architects deliberately incorporated it into their works. The ancient Egyptians apparently did the same, thousands of years earlier. Now compare this level of sophistication to actual Egyptian tombs. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings are essentially decorated caves carved into rock. They are functional. They are covered in beautiful religious art and hieroglyphics. But they do not demonstrate this level of engineering sophistication, mathematical encoding, or construction precision. They did not need to. A tomb needs to be secure and appropriately decorated for religious purposes. It does not need to encode the dimensions of the earth, align to celestial bodies with astronomical precision, or incorporate advanced mathematical constants. Building the Great Pyramid to serve as a tomb is like using a supercomputer to write a grocery list. The tool is absurdly, almost comically overqualified for the stated task. This suggests very strongly that the stated task is not the real purpose. The fifth problem involves the massive granite plugs that seal the ascending passage leading to the upper chambers. These blocks, each weighing several tons, were slid into place from inside the pyramid, supposedly after Khufu's burial, to prevent access to the burial chambers above. But here is where the design makes absolutely no sense if security was the goal. The granite plugs are harder than the surrounding limestone blocks. You cannot cut through granite plugs with copper tools. So what did tomb robbers do? They simply carved around the plugs through the softer limestone, making the granite plugs completely ineffective as a security measure. If the pyramid's designers wanted to prevent access, why use a design that is so easily circumvented? However, if the purpose of the plugs was not to keep people out, but rather to seal the chambers to maintain specific internal conditions, then the design makes perfect sense. Granite is impermeable. It does not absorb moisture or transmit vibrations like limestone does. If you wanted to create an airtight seal or maintain specific acoustic properties or contain energy or pressure within the upper chambers, granite would be exactly the right material to use. These 5 problems represent fundamental contradictions that the tomb theory cannot adequately address. No mummies or burial goods despite being the most protected structures ever built. No hieroglyphic text despite these being absolutely essential for any royal burial. Sarcophagi built into the structure rather than installed during burial. Massive overengineering and precision far beyond what a tomb would require. Security measures that make no sense for keeping people out, but would make sense for maintaining internal conditions. Each problem individually raises serious questions about the tomb theory. Together, they systematically dismantle it. The evidence, or rather the absence of expected evidence, points strongly toward the pyramids serving some other purpose entirely. So if the pyramids were not tombs, what were they? This is where our investigation becomes truly fascinating, because several alternative theories have emerged that actually explain the physical evidence better than the traditional tomb theory does. The power plant theory. Ancient energy technology. In 1998, master craftsman and precision engineer Christopher Dunn published a book that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. The Giza power plant proposed something radical: that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but rather a sophisticated machine designed to generate electrical or microwave energy. Before you dismiss this as pseudoscience or fringe theory, consider Dunn's credentials. He is not a conspiracy theorist or a sensationalist. He spent decades working in precision manufacturing and aerospace engineering. He has worked on projects for NASA and the military, creating components that require tolerances measured in microns. When Dunn examined the Great Pyramid, he applied his engineering expertise and saw not a tomb, but a machine, a power generation facility whose design and construction made perfect sense from an engineering perspective. Let me walk you through how this system might have worked, because the theory is based on sound engineering principles, not speculation or wishful thinking. The Great Pyramid sits directly above underground water channels and aquifers. This is not speculation. Geological surveys have confirmed the presence of significant underground water flow beneath the pyramid. Water flowing through rock creates what is called streaming potential, a natural electrical charge generated by the movement of water through porous stone. This phenomenon is well understood in modern geology and hydrology. It would provide a natural initial energy source for any system designed to harness it. The pyramid's subterranean chamber, that rough, seemingly unfinished room deep below the pyramid that has always puzzled archaeologists, would have served as the intake chamber for this system. The chamber shows clear signs of water erosion, which should not exist if the pyramid was always a sealed tomb. The strange pit in the subterranean chamber and the channels leading from it could have been part of a water management system. Dunn proposes that two specific chemicals, hydrated zinc chloride and dilute hydrochloric acid, were introduced into the system through the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. When these chemicals react, they produce hydrogen gas. Now, before you ask where he got this specific idea, consider that salt deposits and chemical residue have actually been found on the walls and ceiling of the King's Chamber. These deposits have been analyzed in laboratories, and they contain compounds consistent with chemical reactions, not with natural mineral deposits or simple water damage. The hydrogen gas produced by this chemical reaction would rise through the shafts into the Queen's Chamber, and then into the King's Chamber above. Here is where the system becomes truly ingenious from an engineering standpoint. The King's Chamber is constructed entirely of granite, which contains high concentrations of quartz crystal. Quartz has a property called piezoelectricity, meaning it generates electricity when subjected to pressure or vibration. This is not ancient mysticism. This is established physics. Quartz crystals are used in modern electronics precisely because of this property. The King's Chamber sits beneath millions of tons of stone, creating constant enormous pressure on the granite blocks. Additionally, the pyramid's location experiences continuous microseismic activity from the underground water flow and from Earth's natural vibrations. This combination of constant pressure and continuous vibration would cause the quartz crystals embedded in the granite to generate electrical current continuously. The chamber would essentially function as a massive piezoelectric generator. But the system does not stop there. The Grand Gallery, that magnificent ascending corridor with its corbelled ceiling rising 28 feet high, would function as a resonance hall. Sound engineers and acoustics experts who have studied the Grand Gallery describe its acoustic properties as remarkable and clearly intentional. When sounds are produced in the Grand Gallery, they resonate and amplify at very specific frequencies. The space has acoustic properties similar to a modern concert hall, but designed for a very specific purpose rather than music. The Grand Gallery would amplify the vibrations from the seismic activity and from the chemical reactions occurring in the chambers below and above it. These amplified vibrations would energize the hydrogen gas in the king's chamber. Hydrogen, when vibrated at specific frequencies, releases energy in the form of microwaves. This is established physics, not speculation. The 4 narrow shafts leading from the king's and queen's chambers, which Egyptologists have traditionally called air shafts, despite the fact that they do not reach the exterior surface and therefore could not function as ventilation, would actually serve as waveguides. These shafts are precisely angled and constructed with different materials in different sections. The northern shaft from the king's chamber is lined with limestone in some sections and granite in others. These material choices would affect how energy or gases moved through the shafts, exactly as you would expect if they were designed as functional conduits rather than symbolic passages. And what about that granite sarcophagus that has puzzled so many researchers? Dunn conducted acoustic tests on it, and the results are fascinating. When struck, the sarcophagus rings like a bell at a very specific frequency. It is not a coffin. It is an acoustic resonator, a precisely tuned device designed to vibrate at a frequency that would optimize the energy generation process occurring in the chamber around it. Now, I know what you are thinking. This sounds like science fiction. It sounds too advanced for an ancient culture working with copper tools. But consider the evidence that supports this theory, because there is quite a bit of it, and it comes from legitimate scientific research, not from fringe sources. First, the chemical residue. Multiple research teams have documented and analyzed the salt deposits and chemical compounds found in the king's chamber. These are not consistent with natural weathering, water damage, or mineral deposits from the limestone. They are consistent with chemical reactions involving the specific compounds that Dunn's theory predicts. Second, the acoustic properties. Sound engineers and acoustics experts from mainstream universities have studied the Grand Gallery and King's Chamber. They have confirmed that these spaces have remarkable resonant properties that do not occur naturally. The spaces amplify specific frequencies in ways that suggest intentional acoustic engineering. The dimensions and proportions of these chambers are not random. They are precisely calculated to create specific acoustic effects. Third, the electromagnetic properties. In 2018, a team of physicists from ITMO University in Russia published a peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Applied Physics. They used mathematical modeling and electromagnetic field analysis to study how the Great Pyramid interacts with electromagnetic waves. Their findings showed that the pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers and beneath its base. The pyramid interacts with electromagnetic waves in ways that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of physics. This is not fringe research. This is mainstream physics published in a respected scientific journal. Fourth, the precision of construction. If you are building a power plant or any functional machine that depends on resonance, acoustic properties, and energy generation, precision matters enormously. Small deviations in dimensions or angles can cause system failures or dramatically reduce efficiency. The extreme precision of the pyramid's construction makes perfect sense if it was designed to operate as a finely tuned energy system. It makes far less sense if it was just a tomb, where such precision would be unnecessary. Fifth, the shaft systems. The 4 shafts from the king's and queen's chambers are precisely angled and meticulously constructed. They change materials in specific sections. They maintain exact angles over hundreds of feet of construction through solid stone. Why would a tomb need such sophisticated shaft engineering? But if these shafts were functional conduits for gases or energy, then every aspect of their design makes sense. Dunn's power plant theory also explains several other mysteries that the tomb theory cannot address. It explains why the sarcophagus was built into the chamber during construction. If it functioned as a resonator integral to the energy generation system, it would need to be permanently installed in the precise location where the acoustic properties of the chamber were optimal. You could not just place it anywhere. It had to be exactly where it is, installed during construction. The theory explains the lack of hieroglyphics. You do not decorate the interior of a power plant or a functional machine. The chambers needed to maintain specific acoustic and energetic properties. Covering the walls with carved hieroglyphics would alter the surface properties, affect acoustic resonance, and potentially interfere with the system's operation. Function takes precedence over decoration in functional architecture. It explains the empty chambers. When Al-Mamun's workers broke into the pyramid in 820 CE, the system had been inactive for over 3,000 years. Any chemicals would have long since evaporated or degraded. Any hydrogen gas would have dissipated. The water channels that fed the system may have shifted or dried up. What remained was the infrastructure of the machine, empty and silent, its purpose forgotten, waiting for someone with the right knowledge to understand what it truly was. Critics of Dunn's theory often point out that we have no ancient texts explicitly describing the pyramid as a power plant. But consider this carefully. If you were an ancient Egyptian priest who understood how this system worked, would you write detailed instructions that anyone could read? Knowledge is power, and throughout human history, those who possess valuable knowledge guard it carefully. Mystery schools across the ancient world, from Egypt to Greece to Persia to India, carefully guarded their advanced knowledge, revealing it only to initiated students who had proven themselves worthy through years of study and spiritual preparation. We do have ancient texts describing the pyramid as a place of power and transformation. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, speak of the pyramid as a place where energy and light are generated, where the pharaoh becomes radiant and joins the stars. Perhaps these texts are not purely metaphorical or spiritual. Perhaps they are describing, in the language and conceptual framework available to them, exactly what the pyramid did. It generated power. It produced light or energy. It was a place of transformation, not through death, but through the harnessing of natural forces. The power plant theory remains unproven because we do not have enough access to conduct the invasive tests that would definitively confirm or refute it. The Egyptian government understandably restricts research that might damage these irreplaceable monuments. But the theory is consistent with the physical evidence in ways that the tomb theory simply is not. It explains the precision, the materials choices, the internal design, the chemical residue, the acoustic properties, the electromagnetic effects, and the absence of typical tomb features. It provides a functional engineering reason for every architectural feature that the tomb theory dismisses as decorative, symbolic, or inexplicable. The astronomical observatory theory. Encoding cosmic knowledge, the second major alternative theory proposes that the pyramids functioned as sophisticated astronomical observatories and as permanent repositories of astronomical and mathematical knowledge encoded in stone. The evidence for this theory is literally written into the structure itself, in measurements and alignments that demonstrate knowledge far beyond what we typically attribute to ancient cultures. Let us start with the most obvious and undeniable evidence. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with extraordinary precision. It deviates from true north by only 3/60ths of 1 degree. That is an accuracy of 99.98%. To put this in proper perspective, when the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England, was first built in 1675 with the best instruments available at the time, it was not aligned to true north as accurately as the Great Pyramid, which was built over 4,000 years earlier, supposedly with copper tools, wooden measuring rods, and simple plumb bobs. How did the ancient builders achieve this precision? This is a crucial question because the answer reveals sophisticated astronomical knowledge. True north is not the same as magnetic north. A compass points to magnetic north, which shifts over time and varies by location. True north is determined by Earth's axis of rotation, the imaginary line around which our planet spins. To find true north with the precision demonstrated by the pyramid, you need to make sophisticated astronomical observations. You need to track the stars over extended periods, identify the celestial pole, the point in the sky around which all stars appear to rotate, and then use geometry to project that point down to a direction on the ground. This requires understanding celestial mechanics, having accurate timekeeping methods, and possessing advanced mathematical skills. The fact that the pyramid achieves this level of precision proves that the builders possessed all of these capabilities. But the astronomical alignments go far deeper than simple cardinal directions. In 1994, engineer and author Robert Bauval published what has become known as the Orion correlation theory, and it opened up an entirely new way of understanding the pyramid's purpose. Bauval noticed something that had somehow escaped the attention of Egyptologists for over a century. When you look at the three pyramids of Giza from above, their layout matches precisely the pattern of the three stars in Orion's belt. The three stars are named Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The three pyramids are attributed to Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The correlation is not approximate. It is exact. The size of each pyramid corresponds to the brightness of each star. Alnitak, the brightest star, corresponds to the Great Pyramid, the largest structure. The relative positions match. Even the slight offset of the third pyramid from the diagonal line formed by the first two matches exactly the offset of Mintaka, the third star in Orion's belt, from the line formed by the other two stars. But Bauval's discovery went even further and became more controversial. When he used astronomical software to calculate where Orion's belt appeared in the sky during the proposed construction date of the pyramids around 2500 BCE, the correlation was good but not perfect. The stars were in approximately the right position, but the match was not exact. However, when Bauval rolled the astronomical software backward in time to 10,500 BCE, something remarkable happened. The correlation became perfect. The pyramids on the ground matched the stars in the sky with precision. The angle of Orion's belt relative to the Milky Way matched exactly the angle of the pyramid layout relative to the Nile River. This raises profound and troubling questions for mainstream archaeology. Were the pyramids designed to commemorate a date thousands of years before they were supposedly built? Do they encode knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes, that 26,000-year cycle of Earth's axial wobble that slowly shifts the position of stars in the sky over millennia? Mainstream archaeology insists that ancient cultures did not understand precession, that this knowledge was first discovered by the Greek astronomer Hipparchus around 150 BCE. Yet here is evidence, encoded in the largest structures ever built, suggesting that someone understood precession thousands of years earlier and considered it important enough to permanently record in stone. The pyramids may be a message sent forward through time, preserving astronomical knowledge that the builders feared might otherwise be lost. The astronomical alignments continue inside the pyramid, and they are just as precise and just as significant as the external alignments. The four narrow shafts leading from the king's and queen's chambers are not random architectural features. They point to specific stars that held profound significance in ancient Egyptian cosmology and religion. The southern shaft from the king's chamber points directly to Alnitak, the brightest star in Orion's belt. So here we stand, at the end of our journey through one of humanity's greatest mysteries. We have examined the traditional tomb theory that has dominated archaeological thinking for over a century, and we have found it severely wanting. We have looked at the missing evidence, the mummies that were never found, the hieroglyphics that were never written, the design features that make no sense for a burial chamber. We have explored alternative theories that actually explain the physical evidence better than the conventional narrative. The power plant theory that sees the pyramid as an ancient energy generation facility. The astronomical observatory theory that recognizes the pyramid as a repository of cosmic knowledge encoded in stone. The initiation temple theory that understands the pyramid as a place of spiritual transformation and consciousness expansion. Each of these theories has merit. Each explains aspects of the pyramid that the tomb theory cannot adequately address. Perhaps the truth is that the pyramids served multiple purposes simultaneously. Perhaps they were multifunctional structures that combined energy generation, astronomical observation, mathematical encoding, and spiritual initiation into one magnificent achievement. What becomes clear when you examine the evidence with fresh eyes is that the pyramids represent a level of knowledge, sophistication, and capability that we have consistently underestimated. We have been too quick to dismiss our ancestors as primitive, too eager to fit them into neat categories that make sense within our modern worldview, too reluctant to acknowledge that they might have understood things we have forgotten. The pyramids challenge us. They challenge our assumptions about history, about the development of civilization, about the capabilities of ancient cultures. They force us to confront uncomfortable questions. How did they achieve such precision with supposedly primitive tools? How did they move and position multi-ton stones with such accuracy? How did they encode mathematical constants that were supposedly unknown for thousands of years? How did they align their structures to celestial bodies with astronomical precision? The standard answers we have been given do not adequately address these questions. Copper tools and wooden sledges do not explain precision measured in fractions of millimeters. Ramps and rope do not explain the movement and positioning of 80-ton granite blocks 300 feet above ground level. Coincidence does not explain the repeated appearance of pi, phi, and the speed of light encoded in the structure's dimensions. We need to be willing to say those three difficult words that academic institutions often resist. We do not know. We do not know exactly how the pyramids were built. We do not know their true purpose with certainty. We do not know the full extent of ancient Egyptian knowledge and capabilities. And that is okay. Admitting what we do not know is the first step toward genuine discovery. The pyramids have stood for over 4,500 years, and they will likely stand for thousands more. They are patient. They are waiting for us to develop the humility to question our assumptions, the courage to challenge established narratives, and the wisdom to recognize that history is not a collection of settled facts, but an ongoing investigation. What can you do with this knowledge? First, question everything you have been taught as settled fact. History is written by those in power, and academic consensus is often more about protecting careers and institutions than about pursuing truth. When everyone agrees on something, that is precisely when you should look more carefully at the evidence. Second, visit the pyramids if you possibly can. Stand before them. Touch the stones. Walk through the passages. Experience them directly rather than through photographs and documentaries. There is something about direct experience that no amount of reading or watching can replace. You will feel the precision. You will sense the purpose. You will understand viscerally that these structures are far more than tombs. Third, support independent research and alternative archaeology. The mainstream archaeological establishment has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Real breakthroughs often come from outsiders, from engineers like Christopher Dunn who bring fresh perspectives, from independent researchers who are not constrained by academic politics and career concerns. Fourth, teach the next generation to think critically. Encourage children to ask questions, to challenge authority, to look at evidence rather than simply accepting what they are told. The greatest discoveries of the future will be made by those who have the courage to question the accepted wisdom of today. Fifth, recognize that this mystery extends far beyond Egypt. Similar precision, similar astronomical alignments, similar mathematical encoding appear in ancient structures around the world. Stonehenge in England, the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the pyramids of Central and South America, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. These sites suggest a global pattern of ancient knowledge that we are only beginning to understand. The pyramids are not just monuments to dead kings. They are messages from our ancestors, encoded in the most permanent medium available, designed to survive whatever catastrophes might befall human civilization. They are telling us that we have forgotten something important, that our ancestors knew things we do not, that the story of human history is far more complex and fascinating than we have been taught. The question is, are we listening? Are we paying attention? Are we willing to set aside our preconceptions and look at the evidence with clear eyes? The pyramids have waited for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. But the opportunity to understand them, to decode their secrets, to recover the lost knowledge they preserve, that opportunity belongs to us, to this generation, to anyone willing to question, to investigate, to think independently. The greatest mystery is not what the pyramids were built for. The greatest mystery is why we have been so reluctant to question the inadequate explanations we have been given. The greatest mystery is why we have been content to accept a narrative that does not fit the evidence, simply because it is comfortable, familiar, and endorsed by authority. It is time to move beyond comfortable lies and pursue uncomfortable truths. It is time to acknowledge that our ancestors were not primitive. They were sophisticated, knowledgeable, and capable of achievements we can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. It is time to approach the pyramids not with arrogance, but with humility, not with assumptions, but with questions, not with closed minds, but with genuine curiosity. The pyramids stand as a challenge and an invitation. They challenge us to think bigger, to question deeper, to imagine possibilities beyond the narrow confines of conventional thinking. They invite us to join the greatest investigation in human history, the quest to understand who we really are, where we really came from, and what we are truly capable of achieving. The story of the pyramids is not finished. It is still being written. And you, right now, have the opportunity to be part of that story. Question everything. Seek truth. Think independently. And never, ever accept that something is true simply because everyone says it is. The pyramids are waiting. The question is, what will you discover?